Before we get started, many of your friends and sons, I believe, who are very busy at Bethel, we have 1,800 there and 600 on the Watchtower farm, want to have their loving greetings extended to you, and I do that right now. Now you brothers down here in Florida spiritually keep up to date, and you know that the pressures of the old order society continues to grow, and the pace increases. Inflation, of course, increases economically, and so there are problems that confront all of us, more so now than ever before. Do these have any special significance? Well, most all of us know they do, and these are evidences that we're living in the last days. And so that brings up the subject for our study this morning. Earth's hour of test is on. So that is introduced for us at Revelation, the 3rd chapter. So if you have your Bibles, we can begin there with verse 7, where Jesus Christ, speaking through the angel of the congregation in Philadelphia, those spiritual Israelites back there pictured by the congregation in Philadelphia were faithful ones, loyal ones. And of course, there still are some spiritual Israelites still on earth today. The last memorial figures show little less than 10,000. And with them are millions, more than 2 millions of supporters, other sheep. Those are the great crowd. And we're all standing together in carrying on Jehovah's work. So verse 7 goes on to say, these are the things, he says, who is holy. That holy servant is Jesus Christ, who is true. He's spoken of as the faithful and true witness, as you know, who has the key of David. He's the one that's been entrusted with the great spiritual household of God, and he's able to open up the way into this household, and so that no one will shut, and he shuts so that no one opens, so no unfaithful one will be able to sneak into this household under the great King Jesus Christ. And then in a commending way, verse 8 goes on to say, I know your deeds. So just like the faithful anointed in the first century, so the anointed today are still faithful in their work, their preaching, and in their Christian conduct. But notice he says, I have set before you an opened door which involves the preaching service, which no one can shut. And so we're in that time now when the witness work is wide open in 210 countries of the earth, and is opening even still further. And then he goes on to say, you have little power. What does that mean? Well, it refers to little influence as far as this old world society is concerned. We have practically no influence in connection with the political governments of this world. We are neutral as to political affairs. We have no lobbyists in Washington or other world capitals. So it's true we have little power as far as this old order is concerned. But notice, commendingly, again, Jesus says, you have kept my word and did not prove false in my name. Yes, we are still loyal followers of Jesus Christ, our head. Look, I will give those from the synagogue of Satan. Now, who would these be? Well, the synagogue of Satan would be those who have claimed to have had some spiritual connections with Jehovah God, And they've come under the influence of Satan, and therefore are spoken of as a synagogue or a congregational group of Satan, who say they are Jews. The clergy of Christendom say that they are spiritual Jews and are serving the Most High God and Jehovah, and yet they are not, but are lying. And that's becoming more and more evident in this period of time, that the clergy of Christendom are in a false position. Look, I will make them come and do obeisance before your feet and make them know I have loved you. Now, do we have any evidences that some of the scholars and leaders of Christendom, who for many years have thought that we were the way out people, fanatics, and they themselves were the great high priests and leaders of the spiritual Jews, they sort of considered us like a little Jeremiah that had very little ability to say things and to represent God. But now here it is, over 100 years since the Jeremiah class has had their beginning in serving Jehovah God. And here today, what are the evidences now that some of these are beginning to admit, in that way are doing obeisance to the solid position that we have maintained during the past 100 years. I recently came back from Germany, and also some of the news media here recently have practically made the same statement, that you people used to be considered to the left, you might say. But today, we've come to realize that you witnesses have the central position in the field of religion. You're in a solid position. And that the others, which they call the conservative group, meaning the Roman Catholic, Episcopalian, Lutheran, Baptist, etc., that they are the ones that are being shaken. And so even these have come to realize that we're in a central position, and they don't classify us as way out, because today there's a host of these fantastic way out religious groups that have come into being. And the reason is because today we as Jehovah's Witnesses have consistently held to the scriptural position, and our position is coming to be more and more recognized, even by the so-called conservative sects of Christendom. It's not unusual occasionally to hear a clergyman say, and that's been so for the last few years, they wish that their congregation had the zeal of Jehovah's Witnesses. You've heard that said many times in the service, because they realize we have the courage, the confidence in God to get out there in the house-to-house service. And some of them have tried to get their church members to do things like that, but they only last for one or two occasions and then they drop out, do they not? Another interesting evidence that's come to light just this last March, the clergy laughed at us back in 1950 when the New World Translation came out, and we used the name Jehovah in the Christian Greek Scriptures for 237 times. They said, of course, that the Scriptures, the evidences do not back up that position, even though in 1950, when the New World Translation of the Christian Greek Scriptures was released in its first part, there were published the papyri, the Fuad papyri fragments from Egypt, where the Tetragrammaton in its Hebrew form was kept right in the Greek text, which was powerful evidence. But they laughed at us concerning that. But now you'll be interested in knowing that in the Journal of Biblical Literature of March 1977, pages 63 to 83, is an article by George Howard, a religious scholar from the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia, presented a religious treatise on the Tetragrammaton and presented further evidences that even that now in Israel, not in Egypt, but in Palestine, they're finding manuscripts of Greek texts where in the Greek text the Tetragrammaton is preserved just like in the Fuad Papyri, and for giving further evidence as to the restoration of the divine name in the Greek scriptures. And it's interesting to note that they had just a little footnote saying that the first ones who brought this to the attention were Jehovah's Witnesses back in 1950. So this is a little bit of recognition that the position we took back there in 1950 is now beginning to be recognized as solid, and no doubt as more manuscript finds are surfacing, our position will come to be established even that much more. But now, still another evidence that the synagogue of Satan are being forced to realize the solid position of Jehovah's Witnesses is that which was published in the Scientific American this month. This just came out a couple of weeks ago, and it brought high glee to the brothers of the writing department in connection with chronology. We've been laughed at for 100 years, saying that 1914 was the end of the Gentile times, and there have been publications put out, including the Seventh-day Adventists, who have a special booklet with 1914 with a big question mark put out, trying to expose Jehovah's Witnesses as having a false understanding of chronology. And then our position on 1975, which internally is absolutely solid and correct. We've been laughed at there about ending of 6,000 years of man's history. The position that we took was solid, based on 2 Chronicles 36:21, Jeremiah 25:11-12, Zechariah 1:12, Zechariah 7:5, where the 70 years referred to, we've always maintained from Brother Russell's time, is the 70 years of desolation of the land, not the 70 years of desolation of the temple. And yet the Jews and all the religious leaders of Christendom for all these many years have laughed at us because they claim that the 70 years runs from 515 or 516 when the temple was finished, the second temple, and you run back 70 years, and that brings you to 586 or 587 for the fall of Jerusalem. And they've always said that Jehovah's Witnesses who have maintained 607 BCE are in a very ridiculous position. And so we've always varied with Christendom by about 20 or 21 years in connection with the chronology. And the aid book on page 327, paragraph 2, has given their position just as a matter of comparison, which they have maintained as a solid position. And when you get right down to it, they don't use the internal Bible evidences concerning the 70 years, which always points to the desolation of the land. No, they invariably point to the Ptolemaic canon about the 2nd century CE. Ptolemy was a great astronomer in Egypt, and he also published a king list of the kings of Babylon. And this king list was considered to be absolutely faultless, and it had a shortened list of Babylonian kings from Nebuchadnezzar to 539. And they've always used that to back up their fall of Jerusalem in the year 586 or 587. So we've differed with them all these many years. So now I have a Xerox copy of this month's issue of Scientific American, October 1977, with the headline, Claudius Ptolemy fraud. This evidence now is in the same category as when the evolutionists had to face the Piltdown man fraud that was exposed, you remember, many years ago. And the evolutionists always used to rely on the Piltdown man as evidence of absolute strength supporting evolution. But now the Ptolemy, not only the Ptolemy canon involving astronomy has been debunked and exposed as being fraudulent, but now what about the king list of the Babylonian kings, the dynasty there? So I'd like to just read the short evidence here. Moreover, Ptolemy's forgery may have extended to inventing the length of reigns of Babylonian kings, since much modern reconstruction of Babylonian chronology, not only much, but most all that the clergy are using, much modern reconstruction of Babylonian chronology has been based on a list of kings that Ptolemy used to pinpoint the dates of alleged Babylonian observations. According to Newton, that's the scientist that is presenting all these evidences, quote, all relevant chronology must now be reviewed and all dependence upon Ptolemy's king list must be removed. My, that's a great victory for Jehovah's Witnesses and a total defeat for the scholars of Christendom. So this is another evidence then of those of the synagogue of Satan beginning to have to bow to the solid position that Jehovah and Christ Jesus have guided us into during the past 100 years. Well, Revelation goes on to speak of what we're talking about primarily today, this hour of test. Verse 10 goes on to say, because you kept the word about my endurance, I will also keep you from the hour of test. Now, how long is that hour? When does that hour begin? And then notice, which is to come upon the whole inhabited earth. No one's going to be able to escape this hour of test. To put a test upon those dwelling on the earth. And it's this hour of test that we're interested in this morning. Now the word hour from the Greek just means a short time. Well, you remember that Satan was cast out of heaven according to Revelation 12:12, and he knows that he has but a short time, similar to what we have here, an hour. But let's take a look at Revelation 17, 10 to 12, where we have the word hour occurring again. And by the way, as we proceed, we'd be glad to have some audience participation. Now we notice in chapter 17 of Revelation, verse 10, and there are 7 kings. Now remember, the book of Revelation is written in various tableaus, about 14 of them. Each one is a living reenactment of prophetic information. And our study this morning is primarily with reference to the first tableau that involves the 7 congregations. But here is another tableau that mentions about 7 kings or world powers. 5 have fallen, and that was up to the time that John wrote the book of Revelation. That would be in the year 96. Now who can tell me, what did he mean by one is? What power was that? Brother Fry? All right, the Roman Empire, which is the 6th world power. Yes. And this Roman Empire in its 2 sections, the Eastern and the Western, lasted for about 2,000 years when you piece all the parts together. So it had a long time of control. Now the other, but when he does arrive, it says the other has not yet arrived, the 7th world power, and in our day it has arrived. And what is this seventh king or world power? This brother right here in the third row, the brother says the Anglo-American dual world power. Yes. And it says, but who doesn't, he must remain a short while. So we're getting into this idea of an hour. And so the Anglo-American empire system has only been operating now for about 350 years, from the 17th century to the 20th century, where we're more than halfway through the 20th century. And so really, the seventh world power operates just for a short season compared to the 2,000 years period of time that the Roman Empire has operated, even including in the Holy Roman sector of it. And then the wild beast that was but is not, it is also itself an eighth king. Now what is this eighth king that must come up in this picture here, this tableau in the last days, brother? All right, the brother says League of Nations, the United Nations, the international peace and security beast. Yes. And this is an eighth, but springs from the seventh, and it goes off into destruction. Well, now let's see, how long does this eighth king operate? Well, verse 12 tells us, and the 10 kings that you saw mean 10 kings who have but yet received a kingdom, but they do receive, who have not yet received a kingdom, but they do receive authority as kings 1 hour with the wild beast. Well, now let's see, when did this image of the beast, this wild beast, this eighth wild beast have its beginning? Because the hour begins at that time. Sister here, and the sister says 1939. That is not quite correct. Anyone else? Yes, brother over there. Brother says 1945. No, not correct. Sister in front here. The sister says 1919. Yes, that's when the clergy of Christendom endorsed the League of Nations, which was just then proposed as part of the Versailles Treaty as the political expression of God's kingdom on earth. And on January 10th, 1920, the League of Nations, or this eighth power, began, did it not? Yes. So then the hour that we're talking about runs parallel to this hour, which begins about 1919. So it begins after 1914, after Christ Jesus is enthroned, and begins to exercise his power with respect to the affairs of the earth. But now let's see more about that hour. Let's take a look at 1 John 2:18, because John, the writer, also speaks of an hour, and we'd like to check on that. 1 John 2:18 says, "Young children, it is the last hour. And just as you have heard that Antichrist is coming, even now there have come to be many Antichrists, from which fact we gain the knowledge that it is the last hour." Now, John wrote those words 2 years after the book of Revelation was put down in writing. Well, this last hour, what does it seem to refer to? Well, let's take a look at 2 Thessalonians, because remember here he speaks of the Antichrist, and 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 3 speaks of, "Let no one seduce you in any manner, because it will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness gets revealed." Now what's this man of lawlessness? A great Antichrist that comes on the world scene. The sister here. The sister says the clergy of Christendom, the collective group of Christendom's clergy. Now there may be a few individual clergymen that have repented and reformed, but the general group of Christendom's clergy, and when did they really get to be organized in a great way as a powerful instrument to spread darkness and rule with the Roman beast, so to speak? Brother here? Yes, in the 4th century under Constantine, from 325 onward. That's right. But now notice verse 7, which is the tie-in with John. Notice verse 7 says, "True, the mystery of this lawlessness, or the man of lawlessness," the collective group of Christendom's clergy, notice it's Christendom's clergy, not Babylon, is already at work. So even in Paul's time, the Antichrist had its beginning in a very small way, and John confirms that in his time too, till he who is right now acting as a restraint gets to be taken out of the way. Now, what was it that was acting as a restraint during the 1st century that prevented the man of lawlessness to get organized, to just had a few little individuals here and there? Sister? All right, the sister says the apostles, the power of the Holy Spirit upon the apostles. They were able to expose these false ones, were they not? And they had great powers of discernment and judgment. Yes. So then, what do you suppose, going back to 1 John 2:18, did John mean about the last hour is just near now? Anyone a suggestion there? Sister over here? All right, the sister said the last of the apostles was about to die. That was John himself, was it not? And as far as we know, he did die about 2 years later, about the year 100. And so the last hour there refers to the concluding period, short period, from Christ's time, 33, down to about the year 100. Well, now this Antichrist that he speaks of is to produce great fruitage. And Jehovah God gives this vine an opportunity to produce great fruitage. Now, what is this fruitage that would have to come manifest during the hour of this great test upon the earth? Well, 2 Timothy, the 3rd chapter. We're all familiar with that, but let's just notice that again. But know this. So Paul, in his vision and understanding of the future, that in the last days, now he's speaking of this great time which we now see called the hour of test upon all mankind. Critical times, hard to deal with, will be here. Critical times since 1914, 1919. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, self-assuming, haughty, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, disloyal. All these evidences we've now seen on growing scale, having no natural affection, not open to any agreement, slanderers, without self-control, fierce, without love of goodness, betrayers, headstrong, puffed up with pride, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Now this is all considered fruitage, and it's the fruitage that becomes manifest in this hour of great world test. Now you'll notice in this scripture again, going back to Revelation 3 concerning the hour of test, that those who are of the congregation of Philadelphia and also their supporters would be protected during that hour of test. And there would be an endurance. And so we ask the question, how are you enduring? Are you involved in that group that is going to be given protection during this great hour of test? And then notice verse 11. Here we have Jesus Christ still speaking through the angel. I am coming quickly. Keep on holding fast what you have, that no one may take your crown. Here he's referring specifically to the anointed ones. So this hour of test would be a time of great urgency, a great danger, a time that would be approaching the coming of Jesus Christ. He is coming quickly. So that brings us now to Matthew, the 24th chapter, where we want to make a further examination of this matter of his coming, because the day of this time of the hour of earth's test is going to be a time of great darkness upon the peoples of the earth, in contrast to the light that comes upon God's people, Isaiah the 60th chapter. And the storms of darkness will increase, all indicating a terrific storm is ahead. It's like literal storms or hurricanes that you have down here in Florida occasionally. Weather reports are necessary, and we need to rely on such forecasts for the protection of ourselves and our family and our property. We need to know about when is that storm going to touch. Is it going to reach West Palm Beach at 3 o'clock, or is it at 4 o'clock, or is it at 5 o'clock, or just when is that storm going to reach? Now, some weather forecasters may say from their calculations it's going to reach at 3 o'clock. But 3 o'clock comes and the storm doesn't quite yet hit West Palm Beach. But are you going to laugh this matter off and just say, well, these were false weather reporters, therefore don't need to worry that the storm's not going to break? Not at all, because the clouds are still there, the winds are approaching, so you wouldn't call such men false prophets, because the condition is getting worse in that time approaching the actual break. Well, now, what about this great world storm that breaks during this hour of test upon all mankind, where mankind is being tested from every angle by means of the devil and the demons being cast out from heaven, and they are producing every form of religious fanaticism, and materialism is being developed in its many different forms to tempt everyone on the earth. So the pressures that the devil and the demons are putting on are getting greater during this hour of test. So now, where can we get a reliable forecast? And who would be a reliable world forecaster of this great world storm? Well, none other than Jesus Christ. He's the greatest prophet that ever walked this earth. And he forecast the great world storm and the time that precedes it, and giving us advice and counsel, and that's what we have in Matthew the 24th chapter, and also Mark the 13th chapter and Luke 21. So we want to make an examination quickly here of the reliable forecast of Jesus Christ. So now let's have the introduction there, verses Matthew 24, verses 1 and 2. Yes.
Departing now, Jesus was on his way from the temple, but his disciples approached to show him the buildings of the temple. In response, he said to them, "Do you not behold all these things? Truly I say to you, by no means will a stone be left here upon a stone and not be thrown down."
What a startling statement, that all these religious buildings that they saw in the temple area, Jesus said would be totally destroyed. And referring to our time, that all religion would come to a point, false religion, of being totally destroyed. So this left the disciples speechless. And so they left the temple area, went down the valley of Kidron, and came up the Mount of Olives on the other side, which is about 500 feet higher than the temple area. Now let's see what verse 3 says.
While he was sitting upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples approached him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your presence and of the conclusion of the system of things?"
Now notice their question is in two parts. Tell us, when will these things be, that is destruction of religion and all these religious buildings. That's one part. And the second part, what will be the sign of your presence, the royal dignity when you return as king that you've been talking about for the last 3 years, and of the conclusion of the system of things. So this was the more important part of the question. And Jesus now sets out to answer both parts. Now, the first part is answered from verses 4 to 22. And this section has a parallel fulfillment, not only in the first century, but also in the 20th century. So now let's read verses 4 to 6, where he opens up now to answer the first part.
And in answer, Jesus said to them, "Look out that nobody misleads you, for many will come on the basis of my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will mislead many. You are going to hear of wars and reports of wars. See that you are not terrified, for these things must take place, but the end is not yet."
So notice, Jesus is emphasizing spirituality. Look out that no one misleads you spiritually. And so that was a great danger from the year 33 to 70. It's a great danger today from 1914 to our time. And some are going to say that they are the Christ, the Messiah, like Judas and the other Judas claimed to be the Messiah after Jesus' death and misled many people. And in the first century they heard of many small wars and acts of violence in Palestine, just like we, since 1914, have heard of many small wars in various parts of the earth. But we should not be disturbed. The end is not yet. Now let's read verses 7 and 8.
"For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be food shortages and earthquakes in one place after another. All these things are a beginning of pangs of distress."
So now Jesus is referring to super wars. Well, what was the super war between 33 and 70 that occurred? It was the great war between the Roman Empire and the Parthian Empire that lay east of Palestine. And in our day, since 1914, in the parallel way, we've already experienced two super wars, World War I, World War II. And it was brought to our attention at the convention this last summer in the Friday talk. There's still a possibility of a third super war. But we should not become frightened. And then there are going to be food shortages. There was the great food shortage during the time of Claudius, and we've had great food shortages after the World War I and World War II. Now about earthquakes, it's rather interesting that geologically speaking, for many years before Jesus' time, there was a comparative time of peace as far as earthquakes are concerned. But when Jesus was impaled on the torture stake, remember, there was actually an earthquake that occurred at that time. And then, from 33 to 70, there were 4 major earthquakes, which was unusual in that period of time. The first one was in Crete in the year 46, second one in Rome in the year 54, and then the one in Phrygia in 56, and the one in Campania in the year 60. But now in a parallel way, in our days, since 1914 down to the present time, the earth has experienced many earthquakes. While the year 1976 saw more earthquakes than ever recorded before. And you remember that in China, 600,000 people were killed during 1976 in that one earthquake that hit that country. So the forecast of Jesus Christ is amazingly clear and indicates our time as a time for the beginning of pangs of distress. Well, now let's read verses 9 to 14 and see what he further forecasts concerning our day.
"Then people will deliver you up to tribulation and will kill you, and you will be objects of hatred by all the nations on account of my name. Then also many will be stumbled and will betray one another and will hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and mislead many. And because of the increasing of lawlessness, the love of the greater number will cool off. But he that has endured to the end is the one that will be saved."
So we notice in the first century that the Apostle James was put to death in the year 44. And then Paul and Peter were put to death about the year 65. And many Christians were put to death before 70 in the city of Rome during Nero's time. And in our time, we have seen hundreds of Jehovah's Witnesses put to death in Germany, 846 during Hitler's time. And now in recent times in Malawi, more than 100 have been put to death. Faithful witnesses of Jehovah. And so we see that this part of the forecast has had its fulfillment, and it's in the course of fulfillment. We're the objects of hatred among all the so-called Christian groups. And false prophets continue to arise and mislead many today, just like they did in the first century. There were many stumbled like Demas, Hymenaeus, Alexander. And in our day, there have been many who have stumbled out of the truth. And because of the increasing of lawlessness, the love of the greater number will cool off. Now, in the first century, was it the love of the greater number of the Christians that cooled off? Oh, no. It was the love of the greater number of the Jews that cooled off during the years 33 to 70. And what about in the parallel world today? Christendom with its 1 billion people, it's the love of these that has cooled off since 1919. It's not the love of Jehovah's people that has cooled off. And so he that endures to the end is the one that will pass through this great hour of test. Back there, John was one of the many that passed through. He lived on another 30 years after CE 70. And now most of us here today expect to pass through the conclusion of this hour of test on into the new order of things. But it does require us to endure. So again, the question is, how are you enduring in this time? Now let's read verse 14.
And this good news of the kingdom will be preached in all the inhabited earth for a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come.
This was carried out in the first century, the evidence being in Colossians 1:23, which we'll not have time to read, but there you have the verification that in Paul's time already the good news had been spread to all the nations and under the Roman Empire. Today, we have even greater evidence, 210 countries up to now, and then even those countries behind the Iron Curtain, the eastern countries, and those that have banned Jehovah's Witnesses, they too are finding the good news of the kingdom preached. So indeed, it's being preached not as a matter of conversion, but a matter of giving a witness. And during this last month of September, we had this tract distribution. The family, can it survive? How many of you shared in that tract distribution? Well, that's fine. That's almost everyone here. And we had fine results. And so the preaching of the good news is still on. I'll have more to say about that in the concluding talk that will be presented. But this in itself is a powerful evidence that we're living in the time of Earth's last hour, this hour of test, I should say. Now let's go on with Jesus' forecast, verse 15. Will you read that, please?
Therefore, when you catch sight of the disgusting thing that causes desolation, as spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in a holy place, let the reader use discernment.
Now, what was the disgusting thing back there in the first century that was going to be used as an axe to destroy? Yes, sister? The sister says the Roman armies. That's correct. And now in our day, in a parallel way, what is the axe that Jehovah God's going to use to chop down something? Sister here. The sister says the United Nations. That's right. And Jehovah's permitted this eighth world power to develop, and in its second phase or form is the United Nations, and that's the form he's going to use as the act. Now then, what is the holy place, or was the holy place in the first century that the Roman armies eventually chopped down? And brother here? No. Now, Joel wouldn't allow the spiritual paradise to be chopped down. Now, we're talking about the first century, back there from 33 to 70. Brother here. Well, the temple was part of the holy place, but what was the entire holy place that was chopped down? Brother here in the second row. Jerusalem itself, with its temple, was considered the holy place. Now, when did the disgusting thing make its first encirclement of that, giving warning that it had the power to chop down? Sister over there. In the year 66, that's right. And then finally, we'll see in a few minutes, it came in 70 for the final blow. And so the final form of the peace and security beast is the United Nations. And so since 1945, it's on the world scene, made up today of 149 nations, that somehow is going to be used as that axe. But now, what is the holy place today that will be axed down by this instrument? Sister there. Well, the sister said Christendom. That's not quite correct. We used to think that, but there's been a clarification. It's Christendom's claimed right to represent Jehovah God and Jesus Christ. And it's that claimed right that must be chopped down, and all along with it. And so, since 1945, that's all become clearer to us. Now let's read 16 to including 20.
Then let those in Judea begin fleeing to the mountains. Let the man on the housetop not come down to take the goods out of his house. And let the man in the field not return to the house to pick up his outer garment. Woe to the pregnant woman and those suckling a baby in those days. Keep praying that your flight may not occur in wintertime, nor on the Sabbath day.
Now you notice Jesus did not give a date for the time of the destruction of Jerusalem back there, and for the time of the destruction of Christendom and Babylon the Great in our day, but he gave general evidences of urgency. Let the man on the housetop not come down, demonstrating a time of urgency. And so from the year 66 to 70 was a time of urgency to get out of Jerusalem. And so from 1945 to our time is a time of great urgency, not only for the anointed, but for the great crowd to get out and flee to the mountains, the safe place where we declare our allegiance for God and His kingdom. So, and there's no set date as to when the storm is actually going to break. Now let's read 21 and 22.
For then there will be great tribulation, such as not occurred since the world's beginning until now, no, nor will occur again. In fact, unless those days were cut short, no flesh would be saved, but on account of the chosen ones, those days will be cut short.
So then, when did the great tribulation fall upon the city of Jerusalem in the first instance? That is, in the first century. Sister there. Or the brother, yes. In the year 70 CE, and the Roman armies were used to chop it down. And how long did it take the Roman armies to chop down and destroy the city of Jerusalem so that there wasn't one stone left upon another stone, particularly on the temple area? How long did it take them to do that? That's a pretty big job. Jerusalem was a big city. Does anyone remember? Well, it took between 5 and 6 months as far as we can calculate. So it was a comparatively short time. Now, in our time, has the Great Tribulation yet reached us? Well, obviously not. We're all still here, and the old order society is still operating. So, the Great Tribulation that's just ahead, what is the first part of that Great Tribulation that comes into this picture here? Yes, sister? All right, the sister says the destruction of false religion, or Babylon the Great, and Christendom is one of the major parts of that. And so the Great Tribulation lies just ahead, that first part. Yes. Well, now, let's read verse 23.
Then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it.
So this is a transition scripture from CE 70 to our day, that there would continue to be false ones who would present themselves as the Messiah, such as Bar Kokhba, the Jew, in 131 to 135. Then there have been other movements, especially like the Baha'i movement, about around the year 1000, and other groups. And so this has continued to be evidence. But now we come to our day, where from verse 24 on, he discusses the second part of that question that was asked in verse 3 by the disciples about his parousia, his coming in great regal dignity and splendor as far as controlling the earth. Now let's read 24 through 27.
For false Christs and false prophets will arise and will give great signs and wonders so as to mislead, if possible, even the chosen ones. Look, I have forewarned you. Therefore, if people say to you, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. Look, he is in the inner chambers, do not believe it. For just as the lightning comes out of eastern parts and shines over to western parts, so the presence of the Son of Man will be.
Notice presence, parousia. And so Jesus was enthroned as king of the kingdom of the world from 1914 onward into our day. And in our day, false Christs continue to arise. There was that one in New York City whose name was Eric Bovar, B-O-V-A-R. He claimed that he was Christ, Jesus Christ, returned, mind you, not the Messiah coming originally, but the return of Jesus Christ, who still had the power to resurrect. And as this New York newspaper shows, one of his followers died in the month of October, and for 2 months, Bovar and the others tried to pray to bring about a resurrection. But the stench of the corpse got worse and worse, till somehow the neighbors reported the matter, and the police came in and arrested them because it was illegal to keep a corpse like that. And the date was set for his trial in New York City, and so on April 15th, the heading is, "Leader of Cult Leaps to His Death." So that finished another false Christ. He was unable to bring about resurrection. And then here's one that we just had recently, September 11th in New York. The Lord Jesus Christ has arrived. Again, referring to his parousia. And they actually have a picture here that they claim that they have received. It says, photographs of Christ and the Holy Trinity, supernatural in origin, are on display. Well, right away you know that's from false religion, do you not? As soon as they bring in the Trinity. And so, like Jesus said, when they say that Christ has returned in any one place, Washington, New York, Moscow, don't believe it, because when Christ is enthroned in the parousia, or the presence of Christ, the evidence is going to be global. No matter where you are, one part of the earth or the other, whether you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia, or here in the United States, or Germany, you'll be able to get the evidences that Jesus has returned and is undertaking a great dividing work in the earth. Now verse 28.
Wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together.
Now notice the carcass is singular, and here Jesus is using an illustration. So the carcass would illustrate a feeding table, but notice it's singular. So in this time of great world test, this hour test, there's only going to be one spiritual table apparent. And at that table will be the eagles, the far-visioned spiritual ones, the anointed and the great crown. And they're gathered together to feed at this one table. And that's rather interesting and is in harmony with the facts today. Now let's read verse 29.
Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken.
Now, the word immediately is interesting, and our book, The Kingdom of 1,000 Years, goes into this in detail. So in Jesus' mind, in giving this world forecast, his mind travels from CE 70, immediately after the tribulation of those days, down to the time of his parousia, where we now are. We're going to see the sun and the moon and the stars be giving evidences too. Now we know that Revelation 6 also mentions sun, moon, and stars, and obviously they refer figuratively there because the whole book of Revelation is in symbols and signs. And we have thought since Brother Russell's time down to the present time that this scripture has figurative application. But it's only since 1957, that's the last 20 years, with the space age beginning, that we now see that this scripture has considerable literal fulfillment. And the Russians were the first ones that put up a Sputnik into the immediate atmosphere surrounding this earth. And from then on, there have been many vehicles sent up into space. We know that in the days of David, when apparently he sat on the Mount of Olives, meditating and seeing the beauties of the heavens, Psalm 19, and the stars declaring the glory of God, the heavens, the sun and the moon and the stars show great kindness toward the earth. And in the day, same was so in the days of Jesus. There was nothing foreboding as far as men on the earth were concerned with respect to the sun, moon, and the stars. And the days of Brother Russell the same way. But can we say today, in our time, 1977, that there's nothing foreboding in connection with the sun, moon, and the stars? Not at all. We're having problems today, are we not? Due to the sunspots, the sun flares, this has affected the outer currents in the upper atmosphere, and this in turn has affected weather in many parts of the earth. Like last year in New York, we had the worst winter we ever had, and other places are having droughts like in California, and all this is causing great disturbance. And so the sun itself now is having foreboding effects, darkening effects in connection with mankind. And now what about the moon itself? Does anyone here know how many men have walked the moon? But we know it's not an impossibility because it's happened. How many men have walked the moon? It's just an interesting small point, but it's a physical fact. Well, there were 6 of the Apollo missions a success. Only one was not a success. And each Apollo mission put 2 men on the moon. So 12 men have walked the moon, even driven vehicles on the moon. And what has been the purpose on the part of the King of the North and the King of the South to deal with the moon today? Well, they want to make the moon a military piece, do they not? Rays and so on, that's going to bring harm, and they will be involved in warfare. So indeed, the moon will not give its light, kindly light. So the moon is foreboding. And what about the stars? Well, the stars, too, today are giving great problems. For instance, there are the cosmic rays that come in from outer space. Somehow the shielding that there was in David's day, in Jesus' time, in the outer space, that shielding is not as thick as it used to be, the ozone layer. And so these cosmic rays are penetrating and are causing health problems here on the earth, are they not? And did you see this the other day about the mystery X-ray bursts prompt space probe from Washington? A global observation effort is planned this summer to pinpoint the sources in our galaxy of mysterious X-ray bursts 1,000,000 times brighter than the energy from the sun. So there are strange things that are happening and that are affecting the earth. but all from the stars and from the outer regions, again foreboding troubles. And then it says the powers of the heavens will be shaken. The literal atmosphere, the literal heavens today are full of space junk from all these nuclear missions that have been sent up from Cape Canaveral here and from Russia. All those are flying around, are they not? And so they call this space garbage, and that's all threatening the earth too. So we see indeed that these words that Jesus forecast concerning our day are becoming more literal all the time. And then the sign of the Son of Man. You read 30 and 31.
And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will beat themselves in lamentation, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet sound, and they will gather his chosen ones together from the four winds, from one extremity of the heavens to the other extremity.
Like the Kingdom 1,000-Year book shows, this sign we still do not fully understand. It apparently refers to something spectacular that lies just ahead, that is going to bring about a reaction from the tribes of all the earth. It's going to bring about a greater fear than we've ever known before, and a lamentation. But the book suggested that this would not include Jehovah's Witnesses. We will not have that reaction of lamentation and great fear, because this sign signals now the Son of Man, that's Jesus Christ, coming. Now there's that word coming, erchomena. That's the same word that appears in the book of Revelation, where Jesus said, I am coming quickly. And we now see that this coming here refers to the time when he comes as the chief executioner to begin the great tribulation, the day and the hour of which we just still don't know. But he warns us of it. So this is the first time in Matthew 24 he speaks of the erchomena. And before that time is completed, the 144,000 will all have been gathered together from the four corners of the earth, and that we now see has practically come to its completion. And the angels have shared in this. Just incidentally, you may have heard the announcement made at Bethel the other day that the governing body has now 3 replacements for the death of Brother Knorr, Brother Feckel, and Brother Grove that have occurred recently. And the replacements involve Brother Kerry Barber. I believe he's been the circuit overseer here for many years. And then there's Brother Barr from England. And then there's Brother Petzinger from Germany. So that adds international evidence of the gathering there and guidance. So now let's go on from 32 to 35.
Now learn from the fig tree as an illustration this point. Just as soon as its young branch grows tender and it puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. Likewise, also you, when you see all these things, know that he is near at the doors. Truly I say to you that this generation will by no means pass away until all these things occur. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away.
Now Jesus is using an illustration in his forecast here. When a twig begins to be tender to produce the leaves, that does not take several generations. It takes just a few months, and then that's all completed, and you know that summer is near. And so the same thing is true with this whole forecast that we're examining. It doesn't take many generations for all this to happen, but only one generation. The generation of living ones, especially the anointed, back there in 1914, and many of these are going to survive and see the completion of this forecast. And this is a sure thing. As he says, heaven and earth will pass away, but his words concerning this will never pass away. So this is an assured thing. So the generation here does not refer to a period of time, 70 years, 80 years, as some brothers have said in the past. Now let's read 36.
Concerning that day and hour, nobody knows, neither the angels of the heavens nor the Son, but only the Father.
Now we come to that day and the hour for the time of the execution to begin, for the great tribulation to begin in our day. That day and hour we do not know, and neither the angels. So this shows that this is in the hands of Jehovah God as the grand commander to send forth his Son with the execution sword to begin to destroy and bring destruction of this vine of the earth that we now see in all parts of the earth. So now let's realize that it's going to be impossible for anyone to pinpoint a date, and we're not serving in connection with dates. Now we'll have more to say about that in another part of the program later. Now let's read from 37 to 42.
For just as the days of Noah were, so the presence of the Son of Man will be. For as they were in those days before the flood, eating and drinking, men marrying and women being given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and they took no note until the flood came and swept them all away, so the presence of the Son of Man will be. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken along, and the other be abandoned. 2 women will be grinding at the handmill, one will be taken along, and the other be abandoned. Keep on the watch, therefore, because you do not know on what day your Lord is coming.
So notice in this parousia, the presence period from 1914 is a similar long period of time as in Noah's day, where the people took no note of Noah's preaching and therefore suffered destruction. And the same thing is true now. We've been preaching the good news of the kingdom from 1914 to this very hour, and comparatively few have given heed. Then 2 men will be in the field. So here we have an example that Jesus gives us of selective survival. So apparently one will be taken, so he will be one that has a knowledge of the truth and has served Jehovah God, just like we are here. And such will be taken along to safety. But the other will be abandoned like Lot's wife to destruction. He repeats this then in verse 41. But notice he says, keep on the watch. We have to be very careful during this time of earth's hour of test, because we do not know the day your Lord is coming, meaning coming as the executioner, the revelation of Jesus Christ. Now let's read 43 and 44.
But know one thing, that if the householder had known in what watch the thief was coming, he would have kept awake and not allowed his house to be broken into. On this account, you too prove yourselves ready, because at an hour that you do not think to be it, the Son of Man is coming.
Notice Jesus is repeating himself here again, warning us to be awake. Prove yourselves ready. And so, are we enduring today that we will be ready? Because the Son of Man is coming. This hour of execution is ahead and will take place. Now he gives us another illustration, verses 45 to 47.
Who really is the faithful and discreet slave whom his master appointed over his domestics, to give them their food at the proper time? Happy is that slave if his master on arriving finds him doing so. Truly I say to you, he will appoint him over all his belongings.
Now, we're all familiar with the slave being singular and referring to individuals making it up as domestics in the plural, and that this faithful slave class began in 33 and continues to exist to this very day, and is giving proper spiritual food at the one table, or at the one carcass, as verse 28 says. But now notice in verse 46 we have another word arriving here, elthon. Now this is different than the parousia, the presence of Jesus Christ beginning in 1914 with its long period of preparation. It's different than the erchomenon, the hour of the beginning of the Great Tribulation. But this is the arriving, similar to the epiphania, the time for judgment. And that's been going on since 1918, 1919. And in this time, he finds this slave class still busy preaching. And in verse 47 now, he's going to appoint him, give him a new role. And part of that new role is to help the great crowd since 1935 to come out and take their stand. And so now let's conclude the forecast that Jesus gives us here.
But if that evil slave should say in his heart, "My master is delaying," and should start to feed his fellow slaves, and should eat and drink with the confirmed drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day that he does not expect, and in an hour that he does not know, and will punish him with the greatest severity, and will assign him his part with the hypocrites. There is where his weeping and the gnashing of his teeth will be.
We notice that Jesus, in his illustration here, the evil slave, he doesn't break it up into parts like he does in verse 45, so the slave has many domestics. And we've had a clarification of understanding here that Jesus was not foretelling an evil slave class, as we used to say. If that were so, then Jehovah God would be predestinating an evil organization, and Jehovah never does that. So Jehovah does predestine or foreordain the bride of Christ, the 144,000, yes, and the number. But so it's those of the evil slave trait or disposition, and they say in their heart. And this is interesting with our new understanding now, those of the evil slave trait or disposition or attitude would not be limited to just those who used to be of the faithful spiritual class, but now can include those of the great crowd who have been deceived and stumbled, and they too come to have the same evil slave spirit and disposition. And notice them, all of them say, "My master is delaying." He didn't come back in 1914. Parousia of Jesus Christ did not come then. We don't have the evidences of the separating of the sheep and goats and all these things. And so they're like the clergy, the confirmed drunkards. They're so drunk, the clergy of Christendom, on their self-importance, that they can't see the sign of the times that we now see here and have been considering. And so, when the great tribulation breaks, not only will the clergy be destroyed, but also all those who have the evil slave disposition and trait. And that comes at the beginning of the great tribulation when Babylon the Great is destroyed. So here we have an amazing forecast. And so how many of you today here appreciate the great details in the warning that Jesus Christ has given to us in this forecast of Matthew the 24th chapter? So then, brothers, that means that every one of us here realize that the hour of earth's test is on. How are we enduring? Well, Peter indicates this at 1 Peter 4:17. For it is the appointed time for the judgment to start with the house of God. So the spiritual anointed ones have been judged now progressively since 1919. Now if it starts first with us, the anointed ones, what will be the end of those who are not obedient to the good news, those of the evil slave disposition type that forsake? And if the righteous man is being saved with difficulty, the great crowd now, and they are coming out and must build a relationship with Jehovah God, where will the ungodly man and the sinner make a showing? The obvious answer is no. So, brothers, we're here then to share in Jehovah's wonderful work and to heed the evidences that Jesus Christ gave to us, that we may protect ourselves, our families, and work together with our congregations in advancing the kingdom interests. So let all of us here then be able to answer the question as to how are we surviving. With the help of God, we're doing all that we can to maintain our spirituality so that we may survive this hour of earth's test to move on into the glorious new earth.